DIV Ozone 14. DIV Ozone 14 things that you should never do. Sorry, I had to check whether the mic was on, but it appears to be on. Hi guys, here's Paula, the crazy ozone lady, and today in this live stream I will talk about all the things that you should never, absolutely under no circumstances, do when you perform DIV ozone injections. But before we start, I have an announcement to make. I wrote a book. That's right. I wrote a book about DIV ozone injections. So it is a guide. It's a step-by-step guide. So it's basically DIV injections for dummies. So everyone who wants to learn how to inject yourself, how to perform DIV ozone injections on yourself, then this will be hopefully a very helpful resource. Now, the book is essentially ready. It's like 99.9% ready. All I need is just a cover, and a few people told me that they were going to help me in making sure that there are no mistakes, no typos. So it's going to get read through. But the book is essentially ready, and so I hope it will be available in a week or two. I know I said this before, but now, guys, really, it's happening. Now, it's going to be pretty affordable, but anyone who will subscribe to my newsletter will get a discount on the book. So you need to be subscribed to my newsletter. For this, go to thepowerofozone.com/news, type in your email, type in your name, and you will receive an exclusive discount for my DIV ozone injections book. And so this will be coming out in the next few weeks. So now let's begin. Let's start with the topic of this video. So for this I have prepared here a little presentation. So DIV ozone injections, what you should never do under no circumstance. Okay, sorry, I need to remove this here. So let's start again. So number one, do not get up too early. So rest for at least 30 minutes. So I know I've mentioned this already in at least one other video that I did, but this point is really so important that I cannot really repeat it often enough. So after you finish the DIV ozone injection, you need to remain immobile and horizontal for at least 30 minutes. This is very, very important. And I know Dr. Robbins doesn't do it. I know many other doctors who have been trained by Dr. Robbins, who have been trained by other people, don't do it. They allow people to get up right after the injection, or maybe just let them rest for 5 or 10 minutes. But this is not enough. You really want to give it a solid 30 minutes. Because the idea that oxygen is absorbed by the red blood cells immediately, this is unfortunately a myth. This is not what happens. Yes, in some people it can happen pretty quickly, but in others it can actually take some time. So you want to give the oxygen and the blood, you want to give it enough time to be absorbed, so that when you get up, that there is no gas anymore left over in your bloodstream that could potentially travel to your brain and cause an embolism. So this is very, very important. Number two, do not perform injections while standing up or walking. So I know there are YouTube videos out there with people sitting or even standing. There is even another person who's walking from room to room with the needle in his arm and the syringe, and holding the syringe and performing the injection. And this can go all right. This can turn out to be fine for some people, but for others it can have really dramatic consequences. And I'm talking passing out, losing vision, paralysis, and or even death. So the problem is that some people have a deviated septal defect. So when that is present, that means that basically venous blood can enter the arterial blood circulation, before it is transported through the lungs. And when that happens, so if you basically inject oxygen into your vein, and let's say you have a septal defect in your heart and you may not know about this, then the gas, the oxygen gas, could enter the arterial circulation, and then it would be transported again to your brain and cause all those things that I just mentioned. So, and how do you prevent this from happening? You remain horizontal, immobile, and resting, and you do not perform the injection. Under no circumstance should you perform the injection while standing up or walking. So this is very, very important. Next step, do not inject too quickly. So again, this is because, again, the idea that oxygen is absorbed by the blood immediately, this is not correct. This is a misconception that many people have. It can take actually a substantial amount of time, 10, 20, 30 minutes for the gas to be completely absorbed. And so that's why you want to inject slowly. You do not want to inject too quickly. Now, what is too quickly? So too quickly would be if you injected faster than 1 cc every 10 seconds. So 1 cc every 10 seconds, this is the fastest you should go when performing DIV ozone injections. So the correct speed of performing DIV is between 10 and 30 seconds per 1 cc. So you should not go faster than 10 seconds, but you should also not go slower than 30 seconds, because if you go slower than that, then you are running the risk of clotting the blood. So the blood will clot and clog the needle, and you will not be able to perform the ozone injection. So anything between 10 and 30 seconds per cc. This is the correct speed. Next step, do not skip any steps. So anyone who has taken part in my DIV ozone training and knows that there are certain steps that you should respect. And anyone who will use my book, there will also be steps to take to make sure that no air enters, and to make sure that the DIV ozone injections are performed as safely as possible. And you should really not skip any of those steps ever. So really keep to the program, keep to the safety precautions, and this is how you reduce most any risks. Like, well, you cannot reduce them completely to zero, but you will minimize them as much as possible. Point number 5, do not put oil around the plunger. So the syringe, the ozone syringes, their plunger is made out of silicone, and after a few uses they can be a little harder to move. And so because I made a different video that I used a different but a similar syringe, so it is a 200 milliliter syringe, which is also made out of silicone. And this syringe is really good to perform rectal insufflations. And what I suggested is that people put oil around that 200 milliliter syringe in order to make the plunger move easier. And now others then think that you can do the same thing with the syringes that you use for DIV ozone injections. No, you absolutely cannot. You cannot use any oil, any oily substances ever during intravenous injections of anything. So this is also the reason why, for example, oily substances like vitamin D or testosterone are never injected intravenously, but either into the muscle. Well, yeah, that's how oily substances are injected into the muscle. You can never inject an oily substance intravenously. Why not? Because the oily substance will not mix with the blood, and it will remain in that as an oily bubble, essentially, and it can then travel throughout your body. It can enter your brain, and it can cause, again, an embolism. So this is one of the most basic things that nurses are being taught And anyone who works in the medical field to never inject any oily substance intravenously. So if you were to put oil around your plunger into the syringe, you would be running a risk of injecting the oil into your bloodstream, and this could be very, very dangerous. So please, no such experiments, never any oil around the plunger or in the syringe. Point number 6. Do not push through the chest tightness. So I think this is also something that I mentioned in a different live stream. The chest tightness, the sensation of heaviness when breathing or not being able to get to take a breath. This is something that is not rare during DIV ozone injections, and this is most likely because of microembolisms in the lungs. And this is again because for the gas to be absorbed, it takes a while, and as long as it is not absorbed, it is in the form of tiny gas bubbles. And if those tiny gas bubbles travel through the capillaries of the lungs, what most likely what happens is that they stimulate a certain molecule, and this molecule has the effect that it narrows the capillaries, that it narrows those tiny blood vessels even more. So they get stuck. They get stuck in the lungs, in the tiny blood vessels of the lungs. And what happens is this sensation of not being able to breathe, not being able to take a deep breath, and it can even escalate to pain and can be quite uncomfortable. So when that happens, that means that basically you're injecting too much gas for it to be absorbed by the blood, and there's just too much gas is getting stuck in the tiny blood vessels of your lungs. So you should never push through that chest tightness sensation. So when that occurs during a DIV ozone injection, you need to stop. So do not think that, oh, you can just take a deep breath or do something that it passes and then you can finish your syringe. No, don't do this. So if this occurs, stop immediately. That means that even if you've just injected 10 cc, but you are dealing with some acute infection and you really wanted to get all 60 cc in, but unfortunately already after 10 cc you started experiencing the chest tightness, that means you need to abort, you need to stop. Point number 7, do not reuse needles. So this is another crazy idea that someone came up with. There was a question that came up. So there should be really no reason to reuse the butterfly needles because they're super cheap. So a box of 50 of them costs $20. So this is really cheap. So there should be absolutely no reason to do this and not even attempt to do this. But number 1, number 2, it will be really difficult or even impossible to do that, because the needles themselves have a very, very small gauge. It's a 27 gauge, so they're tiny. That means that the smallest amount of blood clogs them up, and you basically can't use them because there's a blood clot inside. But don't even think about this, not with the butterfly needles, not with any other needle. Point number 8, do not be lax on hygiene. So some people think that just because we're dealing with ozone, and ozone can really sterilize anything and everything, and ozone is actually used as a sterilization agent in certain hospitals and laboratory settings, because ozone, as we know, it kills anything and everything, any virus, any bacteria, anything. So people think, the ozone, it will sterilize everything anyway, so I don't need to be that careful. No, don't think that way. Don't do this. So because apart from pathogens, there are also particulate matter. So there are dust particles, there are particles from your clothes. And so you don't want to get this into your bloodstream. So you really want to have everything clean. You want to clean the surface. If you want to use an underpad, disinfect their working station. Make sure that everything is free of dust and contaminants. Also wash your hands, disinfect your hands, and use syringe caps to make sure that no dust can enter the syringe or the filter after you're done with the injection. Next point, Do not continue if you're unsure whether you took all the necessary steps. So again, for the DIV Ozone for the Super Paranoid, which is the name of my DIV program, there are certain steps that need to be taken. One very important step is that you need to flush the line of the butterfly needle before you inject. Now, if you are not sure if you have followed all the steps before you perform the injection or after you already are with the needle inside your vein, and if you're not sure at this point, you need to, again, abort the injection. So it actually did happen a number of times to me that I was already at this point where I had injected my vein and there was already blood coming out and flowing into the line of the butterfly needle. And so I was ready to push the gas in, but then I realized that I wasn't sure whether I had flushed the line of the butterfly needle or not. I just could not remember. And so what did I do? I had to abort. So I pulled out the needle and I started all over again. So, and this is really what you need to do. So if you're not sure, if you have flushed everything, if you have followed all the correct steps, do not think like, it's gonna be okay. Or, you know what, I'm just gonna risk it. No, don't do it. You need to abort and you need to start from scratch. Number 10, do not push the plunger of the syringe with the tourniquet on. All right, so this is also quite important. So, because basically when you have the tourniquet on and the tourniquet is tight and you have injected the vein and you have the blood flashback in the butterfly vein, then most people, their instinct or the next step that they want to take is they want to start pushing the gas in. Now, the next step after you have injected the needle, of course, you tape it down first, and then before you start pushing the plunger, first you need to remove the tourniquet. So don't ever push the gas in with the tourniquet on. Otherwise, you will be creating the same situation that this crazy German doctor was creating 40 years ago, something that I talked about in my other live stream, and that created very, very serious complications, including death. So when you inject, you tape it down, then you remove the tourniquet, and then you start pressing the plunger. So this is also another important point. Next thing, number 11, do not use 55 micrograms per milliliter for non-varicose veins. So this may surprise some, because I know Dr. Robbins, so the foremost DIV expert in the world right now, he says that 55 micrograms per milliliter is the concentration in order to get rid of chronic Lyme, and I believe also other injections. I think this is his standard ozone concentration. Now, I go against that opinion, so I say no, do not use such a high ozone concentration, because 55 micrograms per milliliter is extremely high. So if I want to sclerose varicose veins, sclerose, meaning if I want to close them permanently, all right, those nasty varicose veins on the legs, then I go and I use such a high ozone concentration or even higher, because then I know that this will trigger an inflammation and the inflammation will sclerose the vein permanently. Now, if you are doing DIV ozone injections in order to treat a chronic condition, which most people do, chronic fatigue or some infection, or if you want to boost your immune system, then you rely on the health of your veins. So the healthier your veins are, so the more often you can puncture them, then the better for you, and then the longer you can perform the DIV ozone injections. Now, if they sclerose, if they develop an inflammation, then you cannot perform the DIV ozone injections. And if you use such a high ozone concentration like 55 micrograms per milliliter, you will most likely trigger an inflammation. So don't do it. Ozone concentrations between 25 and 35, maybe even as low as 20, are perfectly sufficient to really treat anything. So there is really no evidence to suggest that it has to be exactly 55 micrograms per milliliter and not 47 or 56.5. So If you want to maintain the health of your veins, do not use such a high ozone concentration. Next point, do not use oxygen of less than 99% purity. That means don't ever use oxygen concentrators. Don't use that oxygen that is suggested by, I think, Dr. O Solutions is his name, that benzomatic that you can buy at Home Depot, I believe. That oxygen has only 95% purity, and also, so this is not high enough. This is an oxygen content which is not high enough to be able to perform DIV ozone injections. But also industrial oxygen, and I understand this may be a little unwelcome news for some, because the general idea is that industrial oxygen is of exactly the same purity as medical oxygen. Well, as it turns out, that this may not be necessarily true, because there are a number of members of our Facebook group, the Ozone Group, who have tested their industrial oxygen, and in at least one case it turned out that the oxygen was at 96% purity, not at 99% purity. So at 96% purity, I would not use that oxygen for DIV ozone injections. But really, there's a really simple solution. So if you already have an industrial oxygen tank, and after hearing what I just said, you don't want to risk it, it's really no big deal, because you can currently buy oxygen, medical oxygen, without a prescription. You can completely legally buy it online. If you're anywhere in the contiguous USA, you just, with a few clicks, put it in the shopping cart, check out, you buy it, and you get it delivered directly to your home without the need of a prescription. And so this is something that I talked about also in another video. I also wrote an article about this, and I will link to that article. So this is a page, it's called omssupply.com, and so you can easily buy the tank, but remember, you need the low flow regulator to that medical tank. You need to buy it separately. You should not buy the regular regulator from omssupply.com. You need to buy it either from Promolife, Simply03, Longevity, or even Amazon. So yes, so if you really want to have peace of mind, buy this medical oxygen. But there's one thing that's even better than medical oxygen, in my opinion, and it's called ultra high purity scientific grade oxygen. And that oxygen has an oxygen purity of 99.994%, which makes it even purer than medical oxygen. Again, you don't need any prescription, you don't need any license, anything. You just go to Airgas and say you want that ultra high purity scientific grade oxygen. And the great thing about this is that, as I said, number one, it's purer than medical oxygen, and number two, it comes with a certificate. So each batch, each tank of scientific grade oxygen is being tested, and you have it written black on white. It was tested, it was found to contain 99.994% oxygen. All right, so I think this is really currently the best solution. It's free to buy to anyone, and it comes in an industrial tank. So again, you get the tank of the scientific grade ultra high purity oxygen at Airgas, but you buy the regulator, the low flow regulator. In this case, it's an industrial low flow regulator separately somewhere else. So yes, so if you have any doubts about the purity of your oxygen, do not use it. Point number 13, do not do DIV if you don't feel confident. So many people say, oh, you know what, I would love to do DIV ozone injections, but I'm scared. If you're scared, if you have any doubts, if you don't feel comfortable doing them, don't do them. There is no reason to have to do DIV ozone injections and not some other ozone administration. When it comes to ozone, there are always other options. So I really, apart from varicose veins, no, not even varicose veins, that there's really not a single condition that I can think of that would absolutely require DIV ozone injections and not some other possibility. So if you can't do DIV ozone injections, or if you don't feel confident, if you don't feel comfortable doing them, there are always other options. You can either go to your doctor and receive any other form of intravenous ozone therapy, or you can do ozone saunas, or you can use the ozone body bag, or you can do a combination of insufflations and drinking ozonated water, for example. So if you feel apprehension, if you somehow feel, no, this is not my cup of tea, injecting myself, no, this is crazy, don't do it. Don't push yourself, don't force yourself. There's really no need to do that. Okay, last point, do not experiment. So many people who do DIV ozone injections, they do them at home, and they sometimes they think that, you know what, I can improve it somehow, I can do this or that, let me try this or that. No, don't do this, do not experiment. So this is, as I laid out in my other video, there are some substantial risks involved with DIV ozone injections. There are many things that can go wrong. They're very rare, but still, when they happen, they are really, really serious. So do not experiment. You know, this is an invasive treatment. You're basically introducing something into your bloodstream. So you really want to be super careful, and you really want to know what you're doing. So take someone who will teach you, someone who has the experience and who has been doing this for many years and knows how to do it safely, like yours truly, for example. So those were the 14 things that you should never do when performing DIV ozone injections. And again, anyone who's interested in the book, subscribe to my newsletter. Here's again the link, thepowerofozone.com/news. Anyone who is subscribed will receive a discount that will be valid only for a short amount of time. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you very much for listening, and go eat a steak. I'm gonna grab 2 steaks, actually, I'm really hungry. And keep it pink, and see you in the next live stream. Bye bye.